Hello and welcome to the Christ Baptist Church devotional. And we're going through the book of Genesis. And we've gone through Genesis chapter 1 through 31. So we've gone through quite a bit of the first book of the Bible. Just a story of God's creation and then God's selection of a man, Abraham, chosen for no reason of the man's goodness at all, but God had grace and reached down and chose Abraham and began to show him what it is to walk by faith in a God who can be trusted. And God has promised to Abraham that he would make him a great family with lots of descendants, more than the stars are in the sky, the sand is on the seashore, and also promised him this land of Canaan. And so out of Abraham, when he was 100 years old, had a son Isaac, and Isaac, when he was 60 years old, had two children, twins, Jacob and Esau. And out of that, we've seen Jacob fulfilling God's, again, prophecy and his promise that he would be the one to carry the seed, that Jacob then really became the child of the promise, and Esau went off on his own and married people outside of the family to really torment his parents, and ended with great strife and anger against his brother because of his deceit. So Jacob had deceived his brother and had taken his birthright. And then they split, and Jacob went back to his grandfather Abram's family and the family of his mother Rebekah, and selected a wife there. We ended up with two wives. He really wanted Rachel, but he worked 7 years for Rachel, but he ended up getting Leah because of deceit of his wife's father, which would make him his uncle. And so he had the wrong wife, and so he worked another 7 years for Rachel. So he worked 14 years, got two wives, and out of that came 11 sons. 11 sons and a daughter, so his family's beginning to grow. And now, after working and being with Laban for 20 years, working for him 14 years for his daughters, and then another 6 years tending his flock, he became a man of great wealth. And we saw that in the last devotion, how he was prospered by God. Even though Laban tried to trick him out of it, God was still faithful and accomplished what he said he would do for Jacob. So now here we are in chapter 32, where we're actually going to see the greatest wrestling match in the history of mankind. I know wrestling's been a sport that's been around, and lately, over the last 30, 40, 50 years, there's been professional wrestling, and people gather, and a lot of people watch, and it's these great matches of these great beings that are, throw each other around the ring. Well, there's actually something much more impactful and bigger to see than that. This is the greatest wrestling match in the history of the world we're going to see here in Genesis chapter 32. And it's filled with excitement. It's how God actually prepares each of us for a wrestling match, because that is what God does. He takes a sinner and wrestles him into faith and then walks with him as he goes. This is God wrestling people out of the kingdom of darkness to the kingdom of light. And we're going to see this here in Jacob in Genesis chapter 32. Here's follow along as we now go through the text. Verse 1, chapter 32. Now as Jacob went on his way, the angels of God met him. Jacob said when he saw them, "This is God's camp." So he named that place Mahanaim. Then Jacob sent messengers before him to his brother Esau in the land of Seir, the country of Edom. You see, Jacob knows he's going back to the land, and he knows his brother's there. And he knows his brother wanted to kill him before he left to go back to his mother's land. And so he said, I better learn how to make peace here. I better figure this out. And I've already just been coming after basically my wife's father, and Laban is coming after Jacob. And we've seen that in chapter 31, where he chased him down but was stopped by God. And now he knows he's got Esau coming in front of him. So he sends messengers to his brother Esau. Verse 4, he also commanded them, saying, Thus you shall say to my lord Esau, Thus says your servant Jacob, I have sojourned with Laban and stayed until now. I have oxen and donkeys and flocks and male and female servants, and I've sent to tell my lord that I may find favor in your sight. So he's looking to send presents and just whatever he can to appease Esau's wrath. The messengers returned to Jacob, saying, "We came to your brother Esau. And furthermore, he's coming to meet you, and 400 men are with him." That's the last thing Jacob wanted to hear. Thinking that if he just gave Esau a bunch of donkeys and camels and servants and all of that as a gift, Esau might say, "Okay, time's gone by, let's just let it go." But the messengers came back and said, "Oh yeah, we saw Esau, and he's got 400 men with him, and he's coming here." Oh my, Jacob is now massively distressed. He has just come from Laban chasing him to take away everything, and now he's got his brother Esau coming in the front chasing him. So Jacob was greatly afraid and distressed, and he divided the people who were with him, and the flocks and the herds and the camels, into 2 companies. For he said, "If Esau comes to the one company and attacks it, then the company which is left will escape." Jacob said, "O God of my father Abraham and God of my father Isaac, O Lord, who said to me, 'Return to your country and to your relatives, and I will prosper you.'" He's now going back to God saying, "God, you told me to come back here. You did. And look what's going on. I mean, Laban has chased me just past. We just set up that altar where he's not going to cross that line. But now I got Esau coming after me. I can't go anywhere. I can't go back, because if I cross that boundary, Laban will get me. And if I stay here, Esau will get me. I'm unworthy of all the loving kindness and of all the faithfulness which you've shown to your servant. For with my staff only I crossed this Jordan, and now I've become 2 companies. Deliver me, I pray, from the hand of my brother, from the hand of Esau, for I fear him, that he will come and attack me and the mothers with the children." He was naturally afraid that Esau's getting his anger, is going to kill everybody. And he's worried about his wives, he's worried about his children, he's worried about the servants, he's worried about all of these that he's responsible for. And then he calls up God's promise. That's what he's been saying here in verses 9 and 10. When he's pressed in, he's pressed from Laban, and he can't go back into Laban's territory. And now he's being pressed by Esau. That's dangerous territory as well, where he came from. And he's got nowhere to go. That's what God does to us, doesn't it? He takes us where there's no place to go and makes us stand right there. It's what Jesus did with the disciples in the lake when he told them to row to the other side, and they couldn't go any further because the wind was pushing so hard against the boat. They couldn't row any further, and a big storm came and just froze the boat right there. And why did he do that? So that he could walk on the water out to them, and they could watch him walk on the water past them, and they could see who he was. God puts us in a place where we can't go to the right, can't go to the left, enemies on the right, enemies on the left, we're frozen, we have to depend on God, and then he says, "Now you will see me." That's what's going on with Jacob. Deliver me, I pray, from the hand of my brother, from the hand of Esau, for I fear him, that he will come and attack me with the mothers and the children. For you said, I will surely prosper you and make your descendants as the sand of the sea, which is too great to be numbered. We can't say this enough. When God puts you in this place where you can't go back and you can't go forward, and it seems like they're closing in on you and you're about to be crushed, that's when you claim a promise. That's when you claim a promise of God. I'm standing here on your promise. For you said, I'll surely prosper you and make your descendants as the sand of the sea, which is too great to be numbered. So he spent the night there. Then he selected from what he had with him as a present for his brother Esau 200 female goats and 20 male goats, 200 ewes and 20 rams, 30 milking camels and their colts, 40 cows and 10 bulls, 20 female donkeys and 10 male donkeys. He delivered them into the hand of his servants, every drove by itself, and said to his servants, "Pass on before me," and put a space between droves. So he's dividing his possessions and his people up into separate parties so they can go on ahead, create space and distance between them so he can at least cause some to maybe get away. He commanded the one in front, saying, "When my brother Esau meets you and asks you, saying, 'To whom do you belong, and where are you going, and to whom do these animals in front of you belong?' then you shall say, 'These belong to your servant Jacob. It is a present sent to my lord Esau. And behold, he also is behind us.'" So that's what you say. This is yours. This is a present. He probably won't kill you then if you tell him that. Then he commanded also the second and the third, after all those who followed the drove, saying, "After this manner you shall speak to Esau when you find him. For you shall say, 'Behold, your servant Jacob is also behind us.' For he said, I will appease him with a present that goes before me. Then afterward I will see his face. Perhaps he will accept me. If I give him enough gifts, maybe he will not be so angry." So the present passed on before him, while he himself spent the night in the camp. So Jacob sent everybody out. Group 1, Group 2, Group 3, and you tell them all that all this is for you, Esau. Now he arose that same night, took his 2 wives and his 2 maids and his 11 children, crossed the ford of the Jabbok. He took them and sent them across the stream, and he sent across whatever he had. So now he sent his protected ones, his family, out by themselves now. So now Jacob's by himself. Verse 24. Then Jacob was left alone, and a man wrestled with him until daybreak. A wrestling match. He's by himself by the river. He sent all his possessions out. He claimed a promise by God. He has Laban. He can't go back there. He has Esau now coming toward him and closing in on him. He's between what we call the rock and the hard place. And so Jacob's by himself, and here comes along a man out of nowhere and decides to wrestle with him. So they wrestle. Verse 25, when he saw, that's Jacob, when Jacob saw that he had not prevailed against him, well, this is actually, no, the man who wrestled with him. He says, when the man saw that he had not prevailed against him, he touched the socket of his thigh, so the socket of Jacob's thigh was dislocated while he wrestled with him. So while they're wrestling, Jacob's wrestling with this man. The man says, okay, I'm seeing that Jacob is not letting me win, not doing that. What does the man do? He just touches the socket of Jacob's thigh and it dislocates his hip. He just dislocates his hip. Verse 26, then he said, let me go, for the dawn is breaking. But he said, this is Jacob now speaking, Jacob said, I will not let you go unless you bless me. You need to bless me. So he said to him, what is your name? And he said, Jacob. Now what's interesting about this is, when do we see this happen before? Genesis 28, Jacob and Esau. When Jacob dressed up in Esau's clothes to say, Father, bless me. Bless me. I've got hold of my father. Bless me. And what did his father say? Who are you? What is your name? And what was the last time Jacob was asked this question? What did he say? Esau. That's who I am. So I can get the blessing. I will lie, I will deceive, I will even deceive you. But here with this man, there's no way he could actually lie to him. This is God saying, let's go back to that time when you were before your father. You want to bless me? What's your name? And he said, Jacob, deceiver, heel grabber. That's me. And this is now what the man says in verse 28. He said, your name shall no longer be Jacob, but Israel, for you have striven with God and with men and have prevailed. You wrestled with God and you didn't give up. You didn't give up. You kept hanging on. And you said, I'm going to hang on until you bless me. I'm going to grab you until you bless me. I want you and I want your blessing so much. I need to get a hold of you. So he said, okay, then I will be the one who changes your name from Jacob, deceiver, to Israel, which means God's fighter, the one who fights or strives with God. You've just now changed from being a deceiver to the fighter with God. Then Jacob asked him and said, please tell me your name. But he said, why is it that you ask my name? And he blessed him there. So Jacob named the place Peniel, for he said, I have seen God face to face, yet my life has been preserved. Now the sun rose upon him as he crossed over Peniel, and he was limping on his thigh because he just had a dislocated hip. Therefore, to this day, the sons of Israel do not eat the sinew of the hip, which is on the socket of the thigh, because he touched the socket of Jacob's thigh and the sinew of the hip. So here we see the greatest wrestling match ever. God, in his circumstances, bringing Laban up to the edge of the border and putting a wall there saying, you cannot come back into my country. This wall will separate us. I'm here. I'm waiting for you because I know you deceived me. You have Esau now coming saying, Years ago, brother, 20 years ago, you stole my birthright, you stole my blessing. I'm coming with 400 men. There's nothing you can do about it. Jacob did whatever he could, humanly speaking, to put people in front of him, gifts and all that, but here comes Esau. He's coming, he's coming, he's coming. That's where God has him. And then God comes to meet him and says, let's wrestle, you and me. And what Jacob does is holds on for dear life. Holds on for dear life. Even when God dislocates his hip, he hangs on and says, I will not let you go unless you bless me. But the one thing God says, before we get a blessing, let's get one thing straight. Who are you? I need to know. Who are you? And what does he say? Yep, I'm the deceiver. I'm the heel grabber. I'm that one. That's who I am. And I want your blessing. This is what God does. He puts us in between a rock and a hard place. Puts us in where it's nowhere to go, nowhere to get out. And it says, now tell me who you are. Tell me who you really are. And this is where we confess. This is where we say, before God, this is who I am. And what does he do? I will now bless you because I'm changing your name. You're no longer a deceiver. You're now the one who fights with God. And when I say fight with God, he's fighting alongside God. He's striving with God. He's there. He's going to be God's fighter. God changed his name. Jacob, Israel. A new name, completely new name that he's now called. Because God has said, I've now prepared you and now you're mine. But first, who are you? Who are you really? Tell me who you are. Tell me I understand what's going on in your heart. That's what God does. Puts us there. And that's the wrestling match that all of us will face, which is actually better and greater than any wrestling match you'd ever see on television. Because this is real. God wrestling with us, putting us between a rock and a hard place so that we can meet him and see him. And he wants us to then hold on to his promise. And if we want to claim that promise and keep that promise, the payment, who are you? Really? Tell me who you really are. Then you will get the blessing. That's what we see in Genesis chapter 32, the greatest wrestling match ever in the history of mankind. Well, we'll see you now next on our devotion of Genesis chapter 33. See you then.